All right, I'm JP Rindfleisch, and I am with AG Bowman. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for your time for this opportunity, JP.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess for our listeners, I would like to know a little bit about who you are and where you are in your writer journey.
Well, I'm a writer who lives outside of Philadelphia. Um, I'm a retired journalist, so for 35 years I was in a newsroom. Um, my intent in going into journalism was to eventually become a fiction writer, and
Hmm.
it just took me 35 years to get there. So I normally what I write are psychological thrillers, um, uh, thrillers in general, um, one piece of horror. So it's around that kind of genre atmosphere that I like to concentrate.
Yeah, yeah. And you sent me the first opening pages for this story, and I would like to know from you a little bit about the story, kind of get our listeners in place as to like what to expect in this story.
Um, I started the story years ago, and unfortunately, tragic events at a college campus sort of like overtook the story. The story is basically about a young woman who survives a brutal attack from a supposed serial killer
Okay.
at a rented home.
Yeah.
This is probably ringing bells for folks who know what happened in that college campus. But the inspiration for this story was actually I'm from Chicago, and one of the most infamous crimes that occurred in Chicago and was talked about years after it occurred was when a killer named Richard Speck had attacked a group of nurses in their home while they were sleeping. This was in the mid 60s. And um, it's one of those stories that parents tell their kids to scare them.
Hmm.
And, and did a good job of that. And I wanted to write something about a situation like that and how this woman survives. And the atmosphere is very much dark academia. It's
Yeah.
kind of as if you had taken the secret history and introduced Hannibal Lecter into the midst of the whole thing. So yeah, that's basically the feel for it.
Awesome. Okay. That helps. I think that'll help guide us through sort of these edits. And I'll share my screen in a second. Um, I just want to say beforehand, I tend to put in a lot of comments here and there,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and I'll send this to you afterwards as well. You can take and leave whatever works for your story. At the end of the day, and I think that this is just important. This is your story, and so you can write it any which way that you want. But let's dive in, and we'll get talking about this.
And I put myself on mute in case there's some background noise, just to.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so I'm gonna zoom in also just a little bit here. So we start off these opening pages with a really short prologue. Um, I would love to see more in this prologue and get us really into that sort of visceral nature with Claire. We'll sort of start off with that first line. I watched Claire die in front of me through a lacy veil knit out of my own blood. I was a little lost with what Lacey Vale knit of my own blood was. I think, do you mean like blood in her eyes? Is that sort of what's happening? Yeah. So, and that's sort of what I started to pick up on, especially when we go down into, I think a couple paragraphs down where it's, try to wipe blood from her eyes. Um, how I might approach something like this to get into that sort of visceral mindset is something along the lines of like I scream, my voice hoarses, and I didn't know who these characters were, so I was placing in little sister, it could be friend or whomever, but I watched them die. The world is red, stained with the stinging and red of my own blood. I love the way that you were using language, but at the same time, there are some places where it would get a little lost or a little confused. So I didn't know how do you feel about that as a first jump in?
And that's fine. I mean, again, as a journalist, you get used to being edited or editing other people, and
Yeah.
uh, you have to kill all your darlings for the sake of clarity. So that's a rule number one. So I'm more than happy with that.
Excellent. I do want to note too, one thing that I loved about this piece was the voice that you used. And it's really interesting that you had said that you're a journalist because it gave such a gritty noir journalistic approach, and I do not want you to lose that voice. I love that. And so definitely as we're going through these edits, I really want you to, I really am hoping that there are ways to get that voice to continue to shine, because I really enjoyed that throughout the piece. So I definitely want to just toss that out there. Um, as we're looking into sort of these next few lines, and I'm noticing this a lot with the what was sent is there's a lot of like factual statements. And one of the things that I really like about Mary Robinette Kowal's definition of show versus tell is the concept of contract versus expand. And what we're doing here by sort of having the statements is we're contracting a lot of things that we can sit in and experience through the main character. Um, and we can expand on those and we can give more depth into them. And so that's why I like the concept of more of a expand versus contract, because I think that some things get lost when trying to explain what show versus tell is, because sometimes it's a little muddy. So here we have the lines like she has turned her head to face me, her eyes pleading for something I know I cannot give. She breathes once, twice, and then her chest stills. This is such a as a opener, this concept is so visceral. Like I, as a reader, want to know what is happening here. And I think sort of expanding on that and giving us more of that fear that our main character Nada has would just add more richness to this. So I'm thinking like she stares at me, those bright green eyes now bloodshot, pleading, and then we get that internal thought, "Oh God, I want to help her. I want to rush over and hold her, feel her warmth once more time." Like telling her it'll be okay. She breathes once, sputtering rasp as blood dribbles from her mouth. She breathes once more, and then her chest stills. All I'm doing there is expanding on your words, but we're in that moment just a little bit more, and we get some more of that internal thought going on. What are your thoughts there?
That's good. One of my challenges is interiority and adding more
Yeah,
interiority to my pieces. So that's a good edit, and I agree with that.
cool. Um, and then here, one thing about this prologue is I love it. I just sort of wanted more of it. So I'm sort of highlighting like opportunities for more expansion. So here, uh, feet skittering on the hardwood floor. It's slick as an ice rink with Claire's blood and my own. Maybe she falls to her knee. Maybe she, we get a moment of jolting pain as she sort of falls. Maybe, hand slipping or something along those lines. But being in those moments where we're sort of in just this visceral moment, I think would help expand on this. Uh, and then I note this here, but one of the challenges with naming characters that we don't know is not having a connection to them. So one thing is I didn't know who these characters were, and now after discovering the from the conversation, like their roommates are right, yeah, they're roommates. So maybe something added to it. So here, Denise is in the dining room, sprawled across the cheap table. And even from this limited vantage point, I can tell she's dead. And then adding, she shouldn't have even been here. And we obviously, I was thinking they were sisters, but it could be something along the lines of like she had canceled her plans with Tom tonight for a party. But then that way we get like little anchor points as to like,
Sure.
okay, we're
Absolutely.
starting to
Who's
pick
Denise?
apart.
Who's Meg?
Yeah.
Yeah. The prologues are controversial, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
Um,
100%.
but they're not controversial with thrillers and
Hmm.
particularly with thrillers. They're not that controversial. In fact, people kind of expect it as a trope. So so I try to cut I try to cut the loaf there a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, But yeah, no, I can definitely expand that scene because it's a very dramatic scene,
Yeah,
and I'm sure having readers have giving them more so they can viscerally feel what's going on with Nada
yeah.
would be great. So thank you for that.
And I think this portion too is a really good like when I say expand, I'm almost thinking this could be about like double or triple what it is, but even then we're not in a huge prologue. You know what I mean? Like we're able to give a little bit of flesh to it without it being this sort of like really long moment. Um, but in this we discover sort of near the end that a pain is too severe within Nada, but we as the reader don't know what that pain is. We don't know like was she stabbed, mauled? And we're very as a reader we're very confused as to what happened. I think we discover here that there was a knife involved because it's in Meg. Um, but I'm curious if we can almost maybe bring this up. Maybe it's the pain that wakes her. Maybe she's holding at her side because there's a wound there, or something that just sort of clarifies how she was injured. Um, and you said this is based off a real attack, so there was an attacker there, and we actually a shadow passed over a glint, so we assume that it's probably some type of killer. I'm just trying to think through what sort of wounds does Nada have?
Well, that'll come out later in the piece, but basically she was knifed in the face. So moving forward,
Which adds the
Nana
blood to
has
the
this
eye.
a giant scar across her whole face.
Yeah, yeah. So
So from her forehead down to her jawline. So that kind of explains the veil of blood
yep,
because it's just dripping over.
exactly. And I think stinging pain, maybe like um feeling at it and feeling like a difference, like, oh God, what has he done to my face or they done to my face? Like that sort of thought um could add to this without truly giving away exactly what happened. And I think that maybe that's something that she watches this, maybe as she tries to sit up, she feels at her face. And so it's within like that second paragraph that we sort of get a quick definition that she's been injured and it's a pretty strong or big injury that's happened to her. Um, I think that that would help. Uh, yeah. How you feeling so far?
This is great. This helps out a lot. I mean, it gives me the confidence to sort of expand the prologue and work on the interiority and make it clear to folks what's going on.
Yeah. And I
Yes.
think too, like this prologue is one, I agree with you that especially in like these psychological thrillers, like this is a good fast action esque prologue. Like we as the reader are put in this really dark moment with our character that we're about to sit with. And we're sort of like living through the trauma that we will either unfold later or I'm based off of everything else, yeah, this is something that happens before, and then we experience all of the events that sort of are the fallout of this. And I think that this is a really good starting point. So all I imagine here is sort of just expanding and just giving more breath into it will really help it shine. Now moving into chapter one. Let's see, where did I start here? Okay, so this chapter one, there feels like there are three sections where we are in a very heady space with our main character, and then we get a like a paragraph or two of just sort of like definitions as to like where we are in space, and then we get into our character. Um, I'll go through a couple of these comments before we reach that one point, but I do want to just mention that now, so that we can start to get some of the gears turning, because I think this chapter might do well with putting that all together and putting us immediately in Nada's body and her situation. So I'll sort of like jump to that in a moment, but I do want to just go over these highlights here. So um we have this note here, when you've read as many writers as I had. So this whole portion up here is I always had dreams of being a writer. And then we sort of talk about all of the things that we've read, and then get to when you've read as many writers as I have, it's only a matter of time before we wonder if I can do the same. This is a really fun way to get into our character's head of understanding that like she kind of wants control, right? Even before the events that happened, it's um having that control over a story, which makes her a very specific type of person. Um, I wonder if you would be able to play with this more. Like, does she want to be a writer with some type of control over the world, like explicitly stating that? Or does she want to, or did she stop wanting to be a writer after what happened? And I think that she sort of stopped it both based off of opinions of other people, it sounds like, if I remember correctly, like half-hearted attempts, scribbles on college road paper, um, but a talent that it didn't have the talent or stamina. Um, I think that that would be fun to play into because really when we get into like why some people write, sometimes it's for control over the world. So I think that that would be something fun to play into. Uh, so here was my note about like the headiness, and I would say up until this point, I I'm with a character that I still don't have the name of. And where we just came from something really visceral. And as a reader, I might have a hard time like latching on to a character because we're in this sort of like ponderous state. Um, and I write here like we're almost missing like the why or the want from the vehicle that's driving them forward. And so I'm curious if there's a way to cement them. And I'm not suggesting that the section gets fully deleted as much as it gets integrated with the later bits, because I think that it's useful information for understanding a character. Um, but I just think that it's sort of I want to challenge you to sort of integrate it within the moments that come up. Feel free to jump in if you have any comments or have any questions.
Um, no, I see exactly where you're coming from because that's one of the concerns I had about that particular section. Part of the challenge with this piece is that uh, that section builds up the twist that comes later on.
Hmm.
And because most of this, some of the book is going to be told through her point of view as if this was a
Hmm.
and and what you're reading there is actually part of the journal that her doctor convinces her to write.
Okay.
So what you're reading there is actually, it is, to your point, it is heady, but that is her journal.
So it's
um
like a journal entry.
yeah, it is her journal entry.
Okay. And
So go ahead.
do you mind telling me what the twist or what portion of this contains the significance, if you don't mind me asking?
No, not at all. Uh you're the twist is that basically not as the person who's an unreliable narrator, and
Yeah.
this
Yep.
journal that she's keeping is an unreliable document.
Yep.
So she's building up an image of what happened. She's building up an image of herself that is at odds with reality.
Yeah.
So you're I'm building a shimmer. I'm building a fiction, an image that's not really there.
Yeah.
And kind of goes with Nada's viewpoint of herself. I mean, I named her Nada, which is nothing in Spanish, because that's how she feels about herself internally. So, so um, I guess I need to make it clear that this is a journal entry.
What uh one thing I noticed too about your writing style, and I think that this part, the unreliable narrator part, I I sort of picked up on, which is
Mhm,
a good thing.
mhm,
Um, I picked up on it because she almost nods to the reader a lot.
mhm,
She breaks
mhm,
the fourth wall. And
mhm.
I'm curious if you can take the concepts of this journal entry and by integrating it into um, this portion, and then after the chapter, having that sort of journal entry that changes a couple things as to what happened, might uh, have a better payoff to it, if that makes sense. Because, and the reason behind that is um, we have a visceral moment, and then we have sort of like this heady journal entry before getting into the action. And as an opening, I question whether or not that creates too much distance before connecting with the main character. Um, and I really love that you want to craft this sort of unreliableness. And I almost think that by putting this sort of visceral moment, and then the scene with her and the doctor, and then the journal entry, because we know in this scene that he wants her to start this journal entry, a shorter journal entry that maybe has just a couple differences in it, just a tiniest little things where someone reads it and goes, wait, I don't know if that happened right, might serve to what you're trying to do.
I did flip it where I did exactly what I think you're recommending. I started with the scene in the doctor's office, and then so it's gone back and forth with she's at the doctor's office and then this journal. So and I've had readers, beta readers, debate, to your point, JP. Where does
Yeah,
this
which end?
at which end, in the beginning or in the end? Um, uh, so I'll add you to the comic books to say it should be close
Yeah, yeah,
to after the Dr. Carmichael. Um,
yeah.
but I
And I
totally
think,
get
yeah, a totally like either way, at the end of the day, like I said, it's your story. And I think too, I think it could work either way. So I'm not going to tell you it's not going to work, because if you've got beta readers that say, "Hey, this works for you," go with that, right?
yeah.
Um,
But I'm sensitive. But I myself have flipped it back and forth, so it's not like I'm set in stone with it.
okay, okay. Uh, all right. So this is the moment I wanted to highlight, because this is the moment we are sitting with our main vehicle or our main character. Um, Prior to this, we've got both that journal entry, and then we have sort of this paragraph where we're listing the setting, um, which is similar to that, like expand versus contract. Um, I would be curious if maybe we integrate this into this portion. Um, I'm just trying to see if I've made a note here about um, oh wait, would it be here? No. Um, but something along the lines of like, I look around me before I get out of the car, hand sweating, grip tight, small canister of mace. Maybe she is looking out to the buildings, and she's
Mhm.
like, oh, I don't want to
I
be
can
here, or
flip that.
something like that. But like, yeah, integrating that sort of this section into this section.
Mhm.
Um, and so here we're out of the car, we're approaching the lobby. We have a sentence here that says, "It's empty, so I enter." Um, how could sentences like this be expanded? I reach the glass doors and my shoulders relax a little, let out a small breath as I stare into the empty lobby. It's safe. No killers or mass murderers here. I push the door open and step inside. And therefore we're sort of back in her head, and we're sort of like getting that relax. This doesn't have to happen for every single sentence out there, but I did want to highlight it as a way to sort of expand on these sort of factual statements, because sometimes those statements can create distance. And this opening chapter is really all about getting the reader to connect with that main character. And I think any option or any moment that we can sort of sit in that fear, especially after reading that prologue and being like, oh my God, what just happened? I mean, like, I feel really bad for her. Like, being able to sit in that, like, yeah, of course you are worried that there is going to be a killer in this room. Like, I would be too if I were in your situation. I think that that's a way to sort of create those connections. Um, Here's my question about the therapy office. So we have her going up to this doctor's office, and then she goes into a waiting room. Is there a receptionist?
No, no. And candidly, I've been to enough therapists to know that they don't all have receptionists.
Okay, okay. Which is fair. I was just like, are we sure there's no receptionist there?
Yeah, no, it's
Um,
the days of therapists having receptionists are like they don't make enough money to hire receptionists in their practices.
Gotcha, gotcha. And I'm used to the ones that have like multiple doctors in an office. So there's one. So for me, experience is a little different.
Yeah.
But yeah, if this is based off of information you know of, then ignore that. Um, so here, this comment, all quiet, no one following me. We know that Nada is rightfully worried about someone following her, but we might be missing why she is doing this? Is it status quo? Does she always have this fear everywhere she goes? Does that mean that she doesn't go out enough? Is this therapy session something she wants to go to or something she has to go to? Is sort of like, how can we move up the the notes that are the dialogue that happens later without, you know, not quote unquote ruining the dialogue, but at the same time giving us more of that, like, what is she doing here? And like, does she want to be here versus is she being forced to be here? Um, and I think that that would help. And I think that this is a good time to actually ask that question. Uh, Nada is coming to this therapy office, and we see a lot of this sort of like fear coming through in this moment. Is this a session that she wants to be in?
No, she's basically being compelled to go because the college that she was a student in wants to welcome her back, but feels that she has this trauma that needs to sort of be dealt with. And you'll see later on that she carries a gun with her all the time,
Yep.
which is a giant
Yep.
known in the
Yeah.
college campus. So basically, they're saying you can't come to school with a gun, but we understand how you're feeling. So go see this therapist.
Yeah. I think that the that is really good information that could be added in here with a couple of lines of maybe as she's getting out of the car, we see the letter from the college saying, you know, that she can't go to the college until she goes to this. Maybe she,
Can I stop you there for a second?
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
why were your point? Now, that all comes out later during the conversation with Dr. Carmichael.
Yeah.
Why there as opposed to later?
I think again, this functions under like the connection to the main vehicle. Uh, could it function later on? Yes. However, and this is like as a reader reading this, and I see these moments of her really hesitant to be here, my immediate question is like, well, then why even go here? And
Oh,
there
I see. Okay,
is
so
like,
basically you want an answer to she's hesitant about going to this place, but she's
yeah,
going anyway. You just want the answer
yeah.
to why is she going?
Yeah. Even if
Okay.
it's not a full answer, but sort
Mhm.
of like a thought, like, I don't want to be here, but I have to be here.
Yeah, so it could be just basically a letter. Okay. All right. I
Yeah.
understand
So
what
it
you're
could be a
saying.
letter. It could be like, I think she says it like a couple of times, or maybe it's just the feeling of it. Um, but there's like this anxiety that we're sitting with, and I think even an answer of just like, I am required to do this because someone is making me do this,
Hmm.
answers the question as to like why she's putting herself through this anxiety. And then we can later discover it's the college, and we can later like fill in those blanks, but just giving that little tiny bit of like why um, helps build up this like
So let
the
me do
moment.
this for the sake of the conversation. Let me turn all the
Yeah,
cards over because a lot of this is basically trickster writing. By the
yeah,
end of the book, or by the middle of the book, you realize that all the roommates that were killed, that were knifed, were killed by Nada,
okay,
and that she was knifed across the face because that was what her best friend had done to protect herself before she killed her as well.
yeah,
Um, and the fear that she feels throughout is that she is a psychopath who has almost Ripley like. So I mean, a better thing would have been, better comp would have been the Secret History meets the talented Mr. Ripley, and Mr. Ripley
hmm
in this case is Nada.
yeah,
So um, so what I'm trying to do in the first half of the book is sort of set up the sympathetic character that you don't realize until the middle of the book
yeah,
that she's actually a psychopath. And uh, so so the challenge here is, why is this woman so scared?
yeah,
She's scared
yep,
because she's always been scared. She's always been
yeah,
afraid that she was going to get caught. This is a pervasive part of her. So I'm trying to set up that fear so it makes sense when she confesses it all to the reader in a journal entry. Um, that everything that she's been doing as a she reads mystery novels throughout the book, and she says, I read them to learn how to escape from
hmm
you people. I'm as
yeah,
I as a psychopath, I'm as afraid of you as you are of me, and I read
yeah,
these survival manuals.
yeah.
uh, so that's what I'm trying to set up here.
Okay, that is very helpful. Um, and I think that if I were her and I was lying to the reader to sympathize with me, then if I were talking to the reader and I was processing this moment and I couldn't hide that I was afraid, I would like if I was not I would tell the reader I have to be here. Like I'm being required to be here.
Mhm.
That would be one thing. Um, I would also, if I can't hide my fear, and my fear is being caught, more than likely what I'm afraid of are like security guards and police officers. But I'm
Mhm.
not going to say that. I'm
Right.
going to say like an empty lobby, perfect. Not even mention like an empty lobby with no security, perfect. But um maybe when we get out of the car, we see, someone pass by and then like an officer off in the distance. But we just, not even, we try to brush it off to the reader. We try to not say that, but sort of like hinting for later. Um, but yeah, that then I would definitely look for those opportunities to make the reader sympathize with me of like, look at me, I'm a scared person and I have to be here. And so I definitely would bring it up then. Um, because I'm trying to make the reader sympathize with me. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really fascinating, by the way. I'm excited for that. Um, okay, so now we have our first introduction with the doctor. And I just thought that Nada was paranoid. Because obviously I didn't have this information. But now I'm almost curious about this because we have him asking, is she Nada? But then later we have a line where he clearly knows that she's Nada. Like she's like, you know my story, right? Or you know who I am, right? And he's like, yeah, I know exactly who you are.
Okay.
Um, so to me, when I was reading this and I was thinking that she was a paranoid individual, but she's known, like her face has been on TV and all this, this would almost seem like really you don't know who I am, like that sort of moment. Um, so I would almost play with this. If he is asking this, maybe she just has an internal like, are you kidding me kind of thought, like my face is plastered all over TV. Um, and that could even be played off to the reader like uh less of a narcissist slash psychopath kind of person and more of a like, wow, I have a moment where someone actually doesn't know who I am. And then later when he goes like, yeah, I know who you are, you're like, of course you do.
Yeah,
Everyone
that
does.
question there is more writerly than anything else, because when you think about it, what he's asking her, if you translate it not into in English, it's "Are you nothing?" And she
Yeah.
says yes,
Yeah.
because that's how she feels. She feels as she is nothing. She has no emotional interiority, and
Yeah.
that's very difficult, to be honest with you, because I've done a lot of research on psychopaths and folks. Um, that is a tough, because they have no interiority. You almost have to
Hmm.
make it up for them.
Yeah.
There's some interiority. I don't want to take away from there is some interiority, but not to the extent that you and I and others would share. So uh,
Yeah. And I definitely think that based off of the conversation and the information I know now, I think this is great, but I do think a beat of like
yeah,
from
understand.
her, even an
Yeah,
internal thought, like, really?
yeah. Okay, got it.
Um,
Absolutely.
uh, I know what happens here and why. Um, and I'm just curious, like, does he take the silence or is he gonna ask her about the weather or try to like do some weird sort of question here? Um, only because like sometimes people do that in general, like, here, come in. Oh, how's the weather outside? I heard it was raining or something along those lines. Just to try and like break the ice.
Mhm.
That's just something to think through. Um, this here is the first time of mention of time of day.
Mhm.
I wonder if maybe as she's in the car, um, or as she's getting out, maybe she made the appointment before the afternoon or before the 5 o'clock rush, and so maybe she's hoping she can get this over with before. But she
Mhm.
could have a thought like that, and then we're like, oh, okay, it's early evening or whenever this is, um, and that would help solidify time earlier. Um, here's sort of a continuation of this comment here. It's how could this look if there was more dialogue? So perhaps he's asking a question about the weather. She steps in, brushes past him, um, and I think that he might have a momentary pause because of what we learn later. Like obviously, as she's brushing past him, he can feel that she has a gun. So maybe there's like a weird pause or a awkwardness from him, but then he tries to continue on. Um, she makes a mental note about the stuffiness of the room before responding about the weather, and maybe that's when she sees that he has a weird look on his face or something. And then she takes a moment taking in the rooms that we get the description of the room before he gestures and he says out loud to take a seat. This just sort of like breaks it up and adds a little bit more dialogue into this moment. Um, which I'm always gonna say, hey, maybe more dialogue here. So that's just an option there. Here, and this is only based off of my experience. And again, if you have different experience, and as you do, but yeah, the paperwork stuff, I was just like, would he ask all these questions? But if you're used to that, or if you're aware of that, then ignore that. Uh,
Yeah, that's basically standard
yeah,
for,
yeah,
especially
yeah,
for single practice.
yeah.
Um,
Um, how? how long ago did the prologue events happen before this event, like in the doctor's office?
A year and a half.
A year and a half. Okay. So she wouldn't have the pain, but she would have the visible scar.
Yeah, she's always going to have the physical scar.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, yeah. Okay. I was just curious, like how long events had happened. Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. Just that note. And then here seems to be like the start of the therapy session. I think the before intake stuff makes sense now that I understand the perspective. Um, so yeah, I would ignore that if you're aware of that. But I would draw this part out a little bit more. What brings you in here today? Not as response then is something like because the doctor referred me. Right, but you didn't have to come in if you didn't want to. So why did you come? Sort of like giving her the wheels of the conversation. That's just an option. But as I was reading
Well,
this, I was like,
actually,
I wonder if
to your point, JP, that's really the point then that I should really underscore that she's there because uh, the college is making her go.
yes, yes,
But
I
that's
I
really,
do think so.
yeah, that's the
Um,
point. I should say that.
Especially because college is making her go and she can't move forward at the college unless she does this. And I think that making that in the forefront of this conversation uh, really makes it creates the bigger sympathy that we have with her because we have been sitting with her as she went through a really big traumatic event that we were with her, and then we see the fallout. She's very anxious all the time, and we think as the reader that it's because of this moment, which it's great that it's not. um, but we think that it's all of this, and then we discover this poor girl can't even go to college until she gets therapy. What? And all of that builds to then when we discover that, oh, she can't go to college because she has a gun on her all the time. But we have so much sympathy for her that when we discover that part, we still have sympathy for her
Mhm.
because we're like, of course she does, because she's protecting herself, because we think, all of
Yeah.
those pieces. So I definitely think adding in more of that, like I have to be here because the college would really um solidify a lot of sympathy for her.
And it makes the stakes clearer that,
Yeah.
here's the stake
Yes.
for her that she has to do this or she can't go to school.
100%.
Yeah, that's
100%.
good. That's a great edit.
Um, um, yeah, so this was when I was like, wait a minute, if he of course knows who she is, why is she asking if she's not a? And I love how you do that. I think that just some mental notes from Nada at this point and the previous point would make us like it creates a connection between us and Nada because we're like, of course he knows who she is. Like, and we kind of like laugh with her. And it just creates that stronger bond with her. Um, this makes it sound like the pro maybe okay, so it was a year and a half ago. And we went see Stitches. Uh, it's not the same thing as hearing it from you. So again, this is different experiences. And I know that like we want to move towards her sort of reliving that moment. And if you have this experience, then go with it. But in my experience, therapists kind of want to build that relationship before being like, hey, tell me about your traumatic experience and let's dive into it. I feel like maybe she would try to drive that. And especially think that she would try to drive and maybe even do it in this first meeting because she's being forced to be here. And so we, as the reader, would be willing to um, sit with her as she wants to push and push and push because we know that she doesn't want to be here because she, like, obviously, all of these things that we've learned about her, and we know that she's being required to be here. So she'll probably try to do as much as she can in this therapy session to get the sign off. So I could see this sort of being flipped where he might be asking to start a couple steps behind and she's like, no, let's just dive right into it, let's go. So maybe play with that. Again, experiences may vary. Um, this is good back and forth. I just wanted to highlight this because I've been giving a lot of edits. So I was like, this is
No,
good. Like, you know.
the fact that
Um,
there are whole pages where you're not saying anything tells me that it worked.
yeah, yeah. I wanted to sort of, especially because we have those bigger concepts and we've sort of like broke through a lot of those of like uh really focusing in on like why she needs to be here. That may result in a lot of like bigger line edit changes just as we go along and we sort of clarify. So I didn't want to like fill this with a lot of comments just because there are those bigger discussion points that I
Mhm.
wanted to have. Um, this was also experiences may vary, but I was curious about this because in my experience, US primary care doctors don't usually prescribe meds for like serotonin levels and whatnot. Not always, sometimes they do.
Mhm.
But usually like long-term stuff, it's monitored by like psychiatric care or
Mhm.
a therapist.
Mhm.
So, and especially with a year and a half, I know that she's going to this therapist, but it made it sound like she's not going to any therapist whatsoever. So I was just curious, like would she, and this is such a weird sticking point, but would she have these meds on her or would she be getting them in a weird way or anything along those lines?
No, she would still be having. I mean, it doesn't. Once she was released from the hospital and she started showing up, and I need to sort of backfill that. Um, and I wasn't sure how important it was, to be honest. But getting these sort of medications through lorazepam, Brexidine, and others normally just takes a Zoom visit, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's just basically a check-in.
Yeah. So, and this is such a weird thing, but it's just because I know of the process. Um, Even if he's like, "Oh, are you still seeing?" and he looks through the paper and says like a doctor's name and she's like, "Yeah, on Zoom every whatever."
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know why, but that was just such a weird like I was like, "Wait, would she be able to get these pills if she's not going to any therapy?" And I think that that's a small sect of people that might have that question, but it was enough for me to highlight it and be like, "Wait a minute."
Yeah. No,
Um
I understand. Yeah. It's easy.
but so I wanted to sort of create a section at the end of this to sort of discuss these points so that when you go back into edits we can work through those pieces. I do want to ask before jumping into this how you feeling so far, how are those sort of those edits and comments?
Yeah, those are great. Thank you. Yeah, they're very
Cool.
helpful.
um so how I would go about approaching this chapter, uh one would be to ask the question of like how do you want your reader to feel by the end of this chapter? um is Is this line the last line of this chapter?
No, no.
There's more to it.
Um,
What
yeah,
how does this chapter end?
let's see. Give me one second if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no worries.
it ends with the line. Well, Dr. Carmichael talks about why she needs therapy, why the college
Mhm.
requires her to have therapy,
Mhm.
and um, and the fact that she's living in the house where the attack had occurred because it belongs to her best friend Meg,
Mhm.
and he's asking her, basically, is that a good idea? And and they're talking about Meg, and Dr. Carmichael says she's your friend who's in the coma. Dr. Carmichael says, his voice quiet. He looks at me intently. Tears begin to peek from my eyes. Yes, I say, she's the only other survivor, not counting me and one other.
Yeah.
So creates this. other question, who's this other survivor between besides Meg and Nada?
Yep.
And uh, so that's part of the mystery. Who was this other survivor,
Okay.
other than the person who committed the crime? And,
So
uh-huh.
so I would think that by the end of this chapter, we've established our strong reader connection to Nada and this sympathy for her, especially around her being forced to almost relive these traumatic experiences by going to therapy as a requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, how do we want the reader to feel sympathy towards Nada for having to relive these moments? Um, I almost wonder, I know that we have him talking about doing a journal up here. I almost wonder if we have this conversation and we reach the end of it and he pulls out the journal and he says like by the end of this chapter like
Mm.
uh consider having this journal, sort of another way of solidifying the fact that she's kind of being forced to relive these moments, write them down, and sort of approach it in that sense. And what that could do is we sympathize, we realize that like not only is she going to have to talk through these moments, but now she'll have to, write them down and process them in a bigger way. Um, and I wonder if by putting that near the end, we might have like this solidification that this therapy is going to be longer than we want it to be.
Yeah, the next chapter basically is a summation of like weeks worth of therapy. I mean, I don't
Oh yeah.
go through the thing. So it's just basically weeks worth of therapy. And in the end, she agrees to keeping a journal. And so do you mind if I just read this couple paragraphs?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So um, I look down at the page. So he's convinced her to keep a journal. She has two journals with her, one red, one green, which will be significant later on. And they're basically because one's the true journal, what she really feels, and the other one's the fake journal that we have been reading as if and Dr. Carmichael has been, at some point reading. So she says, I look down at the pages, the smooth ruled lines, neat and orderly, and I feel conflicted about spilling my messy thoughts and emotions on such a perfect surface. I look back at Dr. Carmichael hesitantly. He has accurately read the conflict in me. Start slowly, he suggests just a thought or two on how you're feeling at the moment or a question you might be dealing with. I think for a moment, dust motes drifting like snow in the room. Then I look at the page, pressing at once, and write a single sentence, 5 words and a question mark punctuation. This act of writing suddenly unlocks a surprising torrent of emotion. The words on the page, jaggy thanks to my poor penmanship, blur as tears unasked for, cascade down my cheeks, and grief grips my heart. Uh, I fold into myself, and Dr. Carmichael allows me to gulp at air and cry myself out in silence. When my breath finally settles, he asks what I wrote. I tell him, and what does that mean to you? That question he asked, leaning forward as if sensing a breakthrough of sorts. I take a final deep breath before I answer. When my words register, Dr. Carmichael sharply retreats, startled. He's about to raise objections when I say with a firmness I don't entirely feel that my mind is made up. I want to know the answer to that question, Dr. Carmichael. I told Dr. Carmichael I want to see him. I want him to tell me to my face. I almost laughed bitterly. I want to hear from the man who did this to me. I won't read the whole of it, but basically, because that would just be too long. But basically, she the next thrust of the book is not a saying that she wants to see Lee Crosswood, the man who attacked them, or the
Mm-hmm.
man who's suspected of attacking them,
Mm-hmm.
to ask him why did he spare her? Why did he not kill her? So that's
Yeah.
one of the central questions, that the reader's confronted with. Why did Lee Crosswood spare this woman?
Yeah. That's good. And that's good. I like it. Um And you said that's the next chapter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good that's a good way of pushing the story forward because we create this connection in this first opening one. We've got that like starting off point. Then we have like this is where things began. We have the processing of how things are going to that point of like now I want to do this. Now of course there's ulterior motives there, but we as the reader are ready to move on. So I think that that's perfect for a follow up to this. Um, so yeah, going through these questions really quick. So how do you want the reader to feel sympathy? What's this chapter about? I think that this is the uh, Nada as part of college entry. Nada must attend therapy sessions until she is deemed fit to attend college and therefore move on with her life after tragic events. Um, what does the main vehicle want? Ultimately, like the want in this is to get this therapy session over with as soon as possible. Uh, I think what she needs is something a little bit deeper. I can't say that I explicitly know, but I definitely think that if she needs to get away with what she did. I think that
Yeah, that's
that's
basically
ultimately what
your
it is.
most important need. Yeah.
What does the doctor want in terms of this scene? Wants to establish a relationship with his new client, right? Doesn't know her that well, knows who she is famously. There is that potential that maybe this is some type of big break if he is somehow known or is somehow involved with her in a way that could be known. That could be an ulterior motive of him. It just totally depends on character. Um, and same with his need. I think that knowing these two things, if he is genuinely just a good guy
Mhm.
trying to help, then knowing these will help drive the conversation because especially if like she just wants to get this as done as fast as possible and he just genuinely wants to help, he'll probably barricade her from leaving in one sense or another. And that really plays out with like the moment with the gun as well because most people would be like, oh, you can't be here. You can't be here with this, or I need to call somebody for this. But he doesn't. He takes it from her and just locks it away. And it's ultimately like, I understand that from what I understand of you, you have this for protection. Um, so I think that that really calls to his character. And so having just a clear definition here and here. Other questions I would ask myself, just what is the turn or the conflict of the scene? I do think it's the gun functions as that because that makes it a little bit more serious. She is attending this therapy session out of a requirement, but um the the recognition that there is a weapon at play is a kind of a big turn of emotion that could have turned in a negative direction had he been a different person. Um, and I think that that choice there is for her to hand it over and be willing to accept whatever was about to happen because and that's something that you could play up a little bit more too is what does it mean to her if she has to give that gun up? And that's my question to you right now. Do you know that answer?
Well, she's actually carrying the gun not because she's scared of being attacked by a psychopath. She's carrying the gun
Right.
because she's scared that she's going to be arrested by the police.
Yeah, exactly.
So, so giving up the gun, and actually in later in the second chapter, um, she insists that the doctor give the gun back to her because
Yeah.
it's her private property. He can't just confiscate it. But she promises not to take it to school. Um, and because she's a con woman through and through, she has her way, the risk and benefits of being caught with a gun again, and she's always going to
Yeah.
fall back on that. I'm just poor
Yep.
woman who's been traumatized and yeah, so that's not as MO. Um, so I'm not sure if I'm answering your question correctly or
You
not.
did. So to me, like if that were determined to be like if this was that big or the one of the bigger turns or conflicts of a scene where we have her being there out of a requirement, but she still has her gun on her. She's still feeling relatively safe because if the police were to come in, she could protect herself, quote unquote, or do whatever she needed to do. Then we have that turn of him acknowledging that she has it. And that creates this emotional stir in her because now she's like, what does that mean? Does that mean that I'm caught? Like these thoughts that could process through her head that we don't get to see. But the choice ultimately is to hand it over. And we as the reader may see the hesitation of her handing it over out of fear of protecting herself, but in reality it's this other ulterior motive. And both look the same to the reader
Mhm.
at this point, and that's perfect for us because then they don't have to know. The readers don't have to know this. But we get to see this hesitation and this fear of handing it over and making that choice to say like I am willing to trust you enough to have this so that we can continue this conversation out of requirement because to me doing this to be able to get to college is more important than having the gun.
Yeah, at that moment. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
I what you're saying.
exactly. And then the fallout being that she does want the gun back, so she's going to do what she can to get that gun back, just not yet. So I think that to me, based off of what I read, that feels like that big moment that then turns the scene into like a form of connection because now we've basically unarmed her and she has to trust him a little bit more because she knows her quote unquote secret, not really, but you know the little secret that she had. um as a final thing, and this is I couldn't pick all of this out based off of the opening, but initial want, if we were to look at story hypothesis, this is my way of doing theme, looking at needs through the Max Neef needs, and it helps to develop how a theme can build over a story and create like resonation. uh, we can really see this want for protection. We see it in a different way than the truth, but ultimately she wants to protect herself. And so that's what's really strong throughout this first half of the story. We'll probably see a lot of these moments where she will do anything and everything to protect herself. Um, there will likely be some type of developing need that happens. This could be since she's the killer, this could be trying to get understanding from other people, the reader, um, of why she did the things that she did. Justification. I think that that could almost be that developing need as like trying to get other people to understand her point of view. And so the more that she lets people in on understanding her, maybe the closer she gets to whatever that true need is. Um, as a true need, I don't know yet, and I don't know if you need to know this quite yet, but at the end of the day, what I would do with the story hypothesis is uh, if you don't know, it's looking at how to make a theme resonate by having protection first. We will probably see her trying to do everything she can to protect herself until midway through the story. We as the reader may learn something about her, or she may lose that protection, or she may reach a point where that protection fails to work, and she has this other thing that's been happening through the background, something that's been sort of driving her through the story. She is basically telling the story to the readers for some reason or another, and it sounds like I always lean back on what I would call understanding because it's like she wants to placate to somebody. She wants somebody to hear her side of things and to understand her. And so she's trying to find those people. Um,
And that's the
And then,
purpose of the journal, basically, is to
yeah,
exactly
exactly.
your point. Her point is her developing needs to be understood, and she's asking the reader to understand her, to be her ally in a sense, to be
And
complicit.
so how I would play with that is any time that she believes that she has the reader on her side, she will get what she wants. And anytime that she feels like she's losing them, maybe because of how the other characters are acting. So this is almost like a little bit meta. But anytime that the other characters are sort of like pointing at her faults and she feels like she's losing the reader, that's when she might lose or start to show cracks. And so you could really play with that. And I think that the anchor of those journals is perfect. I think that that's a perfect direction to go. Um, and then what happens at the end of the story? You don't have to share it if you don't want to. If you want to keep your secrets, you can.
No,
But
it's okay. I mean, at this stage, I mean, no, it's okay. What happens at the end? So throughout the story, you're seeing Nada reading all of these mystery novels,
yeah.
and at the end of the story, through her conniving ways,
Hmm.
she becomes the beneficiary of somebody, and she escapes. Her true need, her internal need, is to escape her life. That's her true. She wants to escape her life as it is. And in the end
Yeah.
of the book, she's at a resort, and she's at a bookstore, and she's buying all these romance novels. And the clerk is asking her, "Well, we've got these really great psychological thrillers over there. Do you want to read any of them?" And she says, "No, I'm done with that. I want romance. Uh, I want a happy ever after. I think I deserve that." And that's basically the end of the book.
Yeah. So here's my idea as to what your story hypothesis sounds like to me. Her true need sounds like freedom,
Right.
autonomy. That's basically like you honestly just answered it right there. So a hypothesis or a theme to me sounds like Nada's need for protection leads her to freedom by means of the reader understanding her. And how I would play with this is it sounds like really at the beginning of the story, we have Nada in this state of always wanting to protect herself, maybe not making those big moves because those big moves are dangerous and scary and like they could out her as to who she is. But throughout this whole process, she's getting the reader on her side. She's getting whoever this external person on her side to justify her actions. And as she starts to do that, we may reach a point in the story where that safety bubble can break and she needs to make bigger moves towards freedom. And
Mm-hmm.
so we'll probably see something along those lines. So then to me, how I would play to that is every time that the reader seems like they're on Nada's side, at first Nada is always protected. And then halfway through the story, when things happen and she gets out of that bubble, Nada gets closer and closer to freedom. Every time that there are cracks in that story, or every time that someone else in the story points to her about like her faults and the reader's no longer on her side, she's not going to be protected or she's going to get farther away from her goal of freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. And so when looking at a scene that you're writing and maybe you read through it and you're like, something feels a little off here. Depending on where it is in the story, going back to something like this with story hypothesis, my question would be like, is the reader on her side in this scene? Yes or
Mm-hmm.
no? Okay, now where is she in the story? And then that could maybe help gauge what is quote unquote feeling wrong with the scene. That's how I use story hypothesis as a tool.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great tool to use.
Cool. Okay, so we've reached the end. Is there any big question or anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about?
No, these are excellent edits. It's given me a lot to think about, ways of sort of tightening up the story.
Yeah.
Um, and, again, the big debate has always been with these opening pages, where does that journal belong? So I'll have
Yeah,
to
yeah.
figure it out. But that because it does play such an integral part in the reading experience. But I appreciate your perspective on it a great deal.
Yeah, excellent. Well, best of luck, and I'll stop the recording and we'll chat for a second.